Today we have an engaging and eye-opening discussion with geopolitical expert Peter Zeihan, who will shed light on the unraveling of globalization, the implications of changing demographics, and the future of energy. In this video, we'll delve into how a geopolitical shift due to the Ukraine-Russian conflict, the aging population in advanced economies, and the decline of Russian industrial and energy capacity could lead to a drastically different world order. We'll also explore how these factors will impact global trade, economic systems, and the green transition. Stay tuned to discover how these interrelated trends are shaping our world and what this means for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful discussions like this.
For Ukraine to win, Russia doesn't just have to lose its military capacity in Ukraine. It has to lose its military capacity to project power at all. And that will lead to a political shift and maybe even a regime collapse within the Russian system. But even before we get there, how can I put this most clearly? Halliburton took a moral stance on the war. Anyone who wants to put money in or do business with Russia has to consider that you are now in an ethical bucket that is closer to Attila the Hun than Halliburton. You want to talk reputational risk? You want to look under the hood and look at rule of law. You want to look at corruption. You want to look at efficiency. But you've got to make it clear that you're going to go places that Nazi Germany didn't. That's what you're going to be a part of if you want to play in that field. Because of that, other companies took their moral guidance from Halliburton. And we've seen a collapse in the capacity of Western techs and capital to get into the Russian space to maintain infrastructure. Their fertilizer industry, just to pick one, was built in the 1960s. It does not work without that foreign stuff. Most of the wells that were drilled in eastern Siberia, upwards of 95% of them, were not done by the Russians. So we are seeing a not so slow motion collapse of the entire Russian industrial space. And the only thing that will fix it is if folks like you throw their own personal money into projects that Halliburton wouldn't. I don't think that's very likely, but think about what that means. Not only are we going to be losing over the next several years in bits and pieces or all at once, it could go any number of directions, we're losing the world's second largest exporter of crude and refined product. We're losing the largest source of palladium, the second largest source of platinum group materials, the third largest source of copper, the third largest source of titanium and aluminum. This has very real consequences. Part of the economic story that you guys have all made mad money on is since 1990, when the world all unified in the late globalization era, is we brought in huge chunks of territory that had not been economically metabolized. This is China, this is Brazil, this is Russia. That is now all unwinding with lightning speed. And anything that requires the base materials to function, we now have to get by without less. So if you want to support an industrial and economic trend, you have to now do it with less copper and nickel and the rest. And that means, among other things, that the green transition can't happen. We just don't have the stuff. We have never, in the history of humanity, doubled the industrial production of any material that we were already using within 10 years. And we now need 3 times as much copper and 4 times as much chromium and 10 times as much aluminum and 10 times as much lithium and 18 times as much graphite, and we're losing Russia, making that statistically impossible. Something will give here. So that's kind of the geopolitical basis. Should we go into demographics now? You were like all psyched about that earlier.
I love demographics.
All right.
Please.
I want to come back to this though.
Yeah. Let's put a pin in it.
Okay, so think of a demographic structure like a pyramid. You've got lots of children at the bottom, very few retirees at top, and just mortality builds it up like that. When you've got a lot of folks under age 40, you've got a consumption-based system that is driven by what people are doing to build their homes and buy their cars. High inflation, high consumption tends to be high import as well. But as technology improves, as you industrialize and urbanize, your population structure turns into a chimney. And that's kind of the magic moment, because you've got a lot of people aged 20 to 45 who are consuming, and a lot of people aged 40 to 65 who are investing. A good balance of consumption and productive workers. And that is the moment that most of the world has been in between roughly 1980 and 2015. But as you keep aging, you eventually open up into an inverted pyramid. And you don't go back from that because your birth rate has now been too low for 50 years. It's not that you're running out of children. That happened 30 years ago. You are now running out of adults. That's Germany. That's China. In 20 years, that'll be India. Most of the world's advanced economic systems have aged past the point of no return. We're going through a moment in the West and in the United States where the baby boomers are finally retiring. And we've thought about that from a fiscal point of view, and that's relevant. I don't want to try to talk anyone out of that. But have you ever thought of what it means for you? Because this is the world's single largest source of capital. And on average, the world's baby boomers retired in December. We're already past the tipping point. Not tipping point in terms of recovery. We passed that as a world 30, 40 years ago. I'm talking about the availability of capital at all. We've seen the cost of capital roughly triple in the last 2 years. We're going to see that again in the next year or two. That's baked into the pie. So we're entering a world where we've got a labor shortage because boomers retiring, a capital shortage because the boomers are changing their investment portfolio. And in most parts of the world, there's not a consumption base to maintain this concept we have called globalization, because ultimately trade is about someone buying something. If you don't have a lot of people aged 20 to 45, there's not a lot of that going on. Northeast Asia and Western Europe are where these trends are most advanced, but the parts of the world where they are advancing most quickly are Russia and Ukraine. So even if we can avoid a general nuclear exchange, even if the Ukrainians continue being the David to Russia's Goliath and actually take it down, we still need a fundamentally different economic model. And the European Union's not going to be part of that. Because remember, not only do the Germans have a starkly terminal demography, they have based their entire manufacturing system on an energy provider that can no longer provide energy. There's nothing about that system that survives this decade. And that's a very different geospatial and economic system of relationships that we at the moment have yet to invent a theory to frame, much less come up with some sort of industrial policy, much less come up with a financial way to play with that in a world with less finance.
Yeah.
In conclusion, we've delved into the complex interplay of geopolitics, demographics, and economics, exploring how the conflict in Ukraine, the moral stance of companies like Halliburton, and the decline of Russian industrial capacity are profoundly impacting global trade and resource availability. We've also discussed the challenges posed by aging populations and the implications for globalization, labor, and capital. As the world grapples with these unprecedented shifts, we are entering a new era where traditional economic models and systems must evolve. New frameworks and policies need to be developed to navigate the complex landscape ahead.